The appointment of Angus Lapps. This is Angus Lapsley, I do apologise. He's down to become the UK's ambassador to Nato, and he's the chap who left some classified documentation at a bus stop in Kent.
Yes, he is, and I'm extremely angry about that.
The number of Chinese electric vehicles in this country is set to go up significantly over the next couple of years, with more than 400,000 expected on our roads by 2030. Now, this should help reduce emissions, but some people are slightly concerned. They're concerned in particular about privacy and the rider questions about whether technology imported from China could pose a national security threat. Richard Dearlove is the former head of MI6. Mr. Dearlove, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Can I ask just a couple of car-related questions? Do you have an EV yourself?
No, I do not.
Oh, right. Well, I get the distinct impression you're not thinking of buying one either.
Not at the moment.
Right. I'm going to assume you wouldn't buy a Chinese-made one, but you wouldn't think of buying a Tesla, for example?
Probably not, because I tend to drive long distances and an electric vehicle doesn't suit my personal needs.
Right.
But I certainly wouldn't buy a Chinese one if I were to buy one.
OK, so you have a slight... you're worried about the Chinese and you have range anxiety, which I think rules you out, so you're not going to get an EV. Actually, I wouldn't get an EV for the range anxiety reason myself. Right, which probably will attract a lot of negative comments on the WhatsApp. But anyway, I've just got to be honest, I'm too worried about the range. So... to most people, this is a baffling world, but looking at it in purely economic terms, it's just cheaper to get a Chinese-made EV. Why shouldn't people get one?
Because you're buying a computer on wheels which can be controlled from and by communist China. It's as simple as that.
So tell me more about what might happen. Let's say I'm going up the M6, I'm making that decision, shall I take the toll road as I head up to the northwest? Who cares in Beijing what I'm doing?
Well, maybe at the moment no one cares, but let's say we are in international crisis with communist China over their attempts to regain Taiwan, so they consider us to be in a state of either declared or undeclared warfare. It's quite possible. They could immobilize your Chinese vehicle.
What? As they could stop me? Yeah,
they could stop you.
But there'll be some people, Mr. Dearlove, who just think this is all racist and fear-mongering.
Well, can I give you a precise example?
Yeah.
In Ukraine, a large number of John Deere tractors were stolen by the Russians from the Ukrainians. John Deere was able to disable all of those tractors remotely.
Yes, which meant?
They couldn't be used. They stopped and they're dead. They destroyed the electronics.
So,
remotely.
Okay, right. So I guess, but China wants to trade with us. China wants to sell us its cheap vehicles. They will know that people like yourself with years of experience are discussing this sort of thing out loud. Would they really do that to their customer base in the West? Why would they do it?
Well, we may be in a state of conflict with them at some future point. Look, the government's already denied Huawei the opportunity to update our 5G. They understand that there is a risk, and the risk is really quite real. These vehicles contain something called cellular modules, and these modules can be operated remotely. They're the gateway to the internet, and it's not a one-way gateway, it's a two-way gateway. So the software in the car can be adapted or changed anytime Communist China wants. Now, look, Chinese companies are beholden to the Chinese government. They're not independent in the sense that we understand in the West. Now, okay, if all goes well and we remain in a benign trading relationship with China, I don't think it's going to be a problem. But at the moment, we have seen, for example, the head of the security service stand up publicly and say recently, China is the gravest threat to our national security. Look, if we create transport dependency through buying too many Chinese vehicles. If we create a situation where there is huge disruption risk to our transport system, if we create a system whereby the data in every Chinese manufactured vehicle is being transmitted back to Beijing, look, we're potentially in a highly vulnerable situation in the future.
So do you think there's a real possibility that the Chinese are playing the long game here? They're making these vehicles attractively cheap, and they are just biding their time until they can, as you suggest, perhaps at some point in the future, when relations are much worse, just disable them?
Of course. Look, all you have to do is to read the paperwork supporting something like the 20th Party Congress. Xi's policy is dominance over the West, dominance over Western technology. And the main weapon, this is all written in their documentation, he sees as science and technology. Now, if we remain in a benign relationship, as I've already said, there isn't a problem. But at the moment, the ambition of China is to dominate the globe in strategic and security terms by 2150. They've said it publicly, but no one bothers to read the small print or think about this. And a weapon along the way for doing this is technology. If you are a foreign company in China operating sophisticated technology, which, creates databases, you are subject to the most draconian rules. The Chinese understand the problem themselves and protect themselves. All we need to do is to introduce reciprocity and do exactly the same to them.
They don't want our cars,
though,
do they?
Sorry?
They don't want our cars.
They don't want our cars, but, there are plenty of companies selling technology into China, and they have to meet draconian requirements on the security side to be able to sell their products there. And, for example, Tesla in China, if it sells a car, those cars are banned from certain areas of China because of the security risk.
Which areas can't a Tesla go into?
I don't know exactly, but there are areas which are very sensitive with security installations. And if you have a Tesla car, you can't take it there.
Gosh, this is super spy stuff.
This is really interesting stuff. We know, the Chancellor has paid a recent visit to China. Do you think she'll have discussed any of these things?
Of course not. They don't understand the problem. That they go to China, they are unaware of what they're up against. Do they take their telephones and do they take their mobile telephones? Do they take special telephones? Do they take their personal computers? All of those are vulnerable once you're inside China.
But surely, Mr. Dearlove, that they will have been advised by your former colleagues in the security services to take every precaution imaginable on a visit to China.
I do hope so, but I'm afraid that politicians are rather ill-disciplined when it comes to security for reasons of convenience.
Right.
Look, I was a poacher for most of my life,
yes.
not a gatekeeper. So I do understand these problems quite intimately.
Yeah. Okay. So why can't we learn the ability to disable any of these Chinese technological abilities in their EVs? Why can't we get ahead of the game?
Well, we could get ahead of the game now that there's an understanding of the problem if the government is rigorous and thinks about the quite complex but possible policies to be introduced so that we can go on buying these vehicles, but at the same time protect ourselves from the vulnerability on the security side. Now, look, I'm not going to go into the policies now. It's quite complicated. It is possible. But I think there's a bigger problem, which is creating dependence in our economy on Chinese manufactured vehicles, which is worrying, and the damage it can do to our own automotive industry, which employs 200,000 people about.
Sorry, go on, Fee. Did you want to say something? No? No, sorry, I thought Fee was lurching towards the microphone there. I just, you're certainly terrifying me, Mr. Dearlove. I don't know what you're doing to the rest of the audience. What about garage?
We just need to be sensible about it. The government needs to think about it. And the government needs to be, as it were, thinking about the policies to protect ourselves. At the moment, it's laissez-faire. They're not doing anything.
No.
We've got, Ed Miliband pushing, purchase of Chinese cars because of the speed
Net zero.
to net zero. And there's no thought being given to the security side. I'm not, saying dump net zero. I'm just saying let's adjust our policies to protect ourselves on the national security side. Okay, costly, expensive, but essential, in my view, in the medium to long term.
And to the garages who are selling these vehicles, these Chinese-made EVs, how much do they know or understand about the vehicles they're flogging?
Not much, it appears. Do they put warning signs on the cars? By the way, this is transmitting data back to Beijing.
Well, do they?
No. I've not seen one in a Chinese vehicle.
Right.
But there should be stickers on the inside saying, beware, this car is transmitting everything that it does and where it goes back to Beijing.
Right, okay. I mean, I don't really know where to start with all this. I mean, cars are not what they used to be. You used to get in. I mean, my first car was a Fiat Panda, and if that thing was capable of transmitting information back to Rome, I would be incredibly surprised.
I don't think it would even get to Rome.
It wouldn't get to Rome. But now, cars are travelling communication and entertainment devices as much as anything else, aren't they? And I know the fear is that there's a danger that the Chinese-made vehicles are collecting data to train AI, possibly for automated driving, driverless cars. Is that also part of the reason you're so worried about this?
I guess so, because I mean the thing in the car which is the problem is the cellular module which is connected to the Internet of Things, and it does a whole crowd of sophisticated things independent of human action. And, that's what we're dealing with. It's collecting and processing data. It can deliver software updates and changes. It's monitoring the way you drive and the controls. It can receive and transmit data. It's got a memory. I mean, it's got geolocational capability. I can go on. It's all there inside the car.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
you're not in control of it. Someone in China's in control of it if they care to be.
I want to hear from listeners who are driving a Chinese-made EV as we speak, listening to this interview. 0333 003 2353 is the WhatsApp number. There were reports yesterday that the FBI has been given a dossier on Lord Mandelson's links to China. Now, he hopes to be our ambassador to Washington over the next Trump years. Are you worried about that possible appointment?
Well, I'm worried that he could possibly be conflicted. I'm sure he can put his business consultancy into an independent trust, but I think it's relatively well known that he has had a lot of business from Chinese companies.
Well, I mean, you've been pretty plain speaking this afternoon. Do you think he's the right man for this most delicate of roles?
Well, personally, I do not.
Right. What about the appointment of Angus Lapsley? This is Angus Lapsley, I do apologise. He's down to become the UK's ambassador to Nato, and he's the chap who left some classified documentation at a bus stop in Kent.
Yes, he is, and I'm extremely angry about that.
Well, have you done anything about it? Are you still...
How would I do anything about it? I'm retired. I've certainly complained about it to various people.
And what have they said?
Nothing.
Right. When you say you're retired, I'm just to put my mind at rest. There will be some cynics who are thinking: Is Richard Dearlove speaking on behalf of the British car industry? Has he been asked to put a word in? I mean, have you?
Absolutely not. I have no official contact or private contact with anybody in the car industry whatsoever. I do have contact with a number of former security experts who are independent commentators and who are deeply worried about the problems that I've tried to articulate in this interview.
And do you feel frustrated that your voice, and I know you're not alone, is not being listened to?
Well, I think we're beginning to be listened to. I've been around this circuit already with Huawei. I was extremely outspoken. I was told to shut up and eventually we change government policy. So I'm pretty confident in this area we can do the same, because I think people will come to their senses.
Really interesting to have you on the programme. Thank you very much. Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6.
Buy a Skoda EV. I don't think there are any threats hanging over that company. You get a very nice free pen with a torch at the end of it, Jane.
A free pen?
Yes, you do.
Well, no, I'm in.
It's so worth it, although maybe the pen's listening to me too.
Do you know, I just wouldn't put anything past anything. That's how
know.
I go about my
But
business.
you've always been deeply cynical and troubled by the world. So I imagine that you might actually be the last person on the planet who doesn't have an EV of any description because of your range anxiety, least of all one operated out of Beijing.